At least some of you have heard a good amount of the story, and some of you have heard maybe part of the story, but nobody's really heard the whole thing. So, I think most people's faith story of coming to find God is very different because, at least in my experience, other people I've talked to, they were not believers and then they became believers, or they belonged to a different religion and then they converted to Christianity. But in my case, it was that I was a believer, but I was actively sort of against God. For about 10 years of my life, I was practicing witchcraft, and I lived a life that was about pride and selfishness, and I hurt a lot of people. And over time, all of the relationships in my life were slowly destroyed. I was unfaithful to my girlfriend. I reconnected with some friends only because a death happened that was someone very close to all of us, and I ended up with them at the funeral. And then over the next year, I destroyed all those relationships again, even after having a chance at redemption. So, September of 2022, about a year and a half ago, I came back to Salem, where I had grown up, and I had burned all these bridges, and I didn't know anybody anymore. And just that shows you kind of the path, how well it works for you if you live a life against God. And New Year's Eve came around. And every year before that, for 10 years, I would always be at a party, getting very drunk with a lot of people and partying all night. And this time, I was completely alone, and I just went to bed early. When I woke up the next morning, it was early in the morning, which was very unusual for me at this time. And it was a Sunday, and it was the first day of the new year. And I said, I have to do something different. I have to make a change here. And it's bright and early Sunday morning. So I said, I'm going to that church that's down the street. Now, having grown up in Salem, I had walked by this church a whole bunch of times as a kid, and I remember that stained glass window in the back. And when you see it at night, with the lights on in here, you see Jesus outside with the lantern knocking. And there is something very inviting about that because it feels like he's outside with you. He's saying, let's go in, come with me. And having moved back to Salem, I'd already walked past the church again 100 times in the couple months I'd been here up to this point. So I knew this was the place. This was where I was meant to go. And what actually got me to choose church is hard to pin down because it's a lot of things. It was a lot of little things that added up over time. And one of them is really striking now to think back on, but I would joke to my friends, maybe I should go to church. It started out as a joke, and it was very funny to them at the time and very ironic because I was the last person they expected to end up in a church. I wore clothes with satanic art on them. I was the goth kid from Salem that did witchcraft. And then over time, I said it enough that it almost stopped being a joke to me. It was like I was literally calling for help to myself. And, a lot of other little breadcrumbs. It would take forever for me to remember them all, but God was definitely active in my life, and he led me slowly here somehow. And I walked in that front door on January 1st, and I had no idea what to expect. I was kind of terrified because I felt like I was polluting the place with my presence by even coming in here. Like I did not belong, and I didn't know what people would think. I thought they'd take one look at me and just sense there was something wrong and that I shouldn't be here. And Bonnie was the first person to say hello, and she was so welcoming. And then Fran came and said hello, and she was so welcoming. And this church was immediately like family I had not seen in a long time, even though I had never met any of you before. And I loved that first Sunday I was here, and I said, I'm coming back. And a week rolled by, and it wasn't like it was just this immediate change in my life. I had fixed everything about myself, but a week rolled by, and I said, y'all go back again and see if it wasn't just a fluke, maybe it was just novelty, maybe it'll have worn off. I came back the second Sunday, and it was even better. And Pastor Stephen that day, he gave a sermon on the three wise men coming to see Jesus and how they had been pagan, but they they recognized, the star guiding them to Christ, and it just resonated with me immediately. So I kept coming back, and I kept coming back, and over time, it did a lot of work in me, and I felt the goodness creeping into my life and the benefits coming from it and the blessing and just the relief of being in touch with God and realizing I wasn't actively working against goodness anymore. But there was one experience that was the most powerful, and that's the one that I really need to talk about. And that first time I came in here, before I left the church, I looked at that window, and I guess I kind of prayed. And at the time, there was like a weight lifted off me, but I didn't understand yet exactly what it meant. It was like I had a conversation with Christ, but it was a language I didn't speak quite yet, if that makes any sense. It's the only way I can describe it to people. But on Good Friday, that first year in this church, I came in that night, and we had the cross was brought forward, and the lights were out, and we prayed, and we did the whole ceremony that day. And there was like a thunderbolt hit me, where I could suddenly speak that language. And it was like I could remember the conversation my first day in the church. And I had said to Jesus, like, is it really possible for someone like me to be redeemed? Basically, I understand people who were, they were sinners and they were non-believers. They didn't know you, and then they came to know you. But I was someone who believed that you exist but actively work against you. I was literally speaking with demons. How is it possible that I can be forgiven? And basically, the answer I got was, you're praying to a picture of Jesus in a church right now on a Sunday morning, and you think you gave your soul to the devil? And I was like, how can it be that easy that I can just walk in here and just be forgiven? Just like that, just in a minute. And he said, I didn't forgive you when you walked in the church. I forgave you over 2,000 years ago when I died on the cross, and that was not easy. So, pretty much from that moment on, my life has changed drastically, not just externally, but internally. You can feel the difference in my soul, and I'm grateful every single day for this church and the people that I've met here, and the connections I've made, and the family I've made, and I'm very excited for this baptism to kind of put a final stamp on that, to show, I'm not the person that I used to be. And I'm very grateful. Thank you.